The sharp scent of polished wood and the cold glare of fluorescent lights filled the boardroom where I sat. George Manning, a man who had given 11 years of his life shaping this company. The faces around the table seemed unfamiliar now, distant shadows compared to the allies and colleagues I once knew. Each photograph on the walls, each plaque of achievement, felt like relics of a past that was slipping through my fingers. Derek entered with the confidence of youth untempered by experience, his eyes locking on me with a silence that spoke louder than words. The son I had nurtured, coached through early failures, had transformed into a man who no longer needed his father. At least, that was the message he intended to send. Without warning, Derek's voice cut across the room, clear and final. "From this moment forward, I am cutting all ties with my father," he announced, his tone edged with cold authority. "George Manning will have no part in company decisions or access to any resources. This is my company now." The words struck like a blow to the chest. I felt the heat drain from my face, replaced by a numb shock so deep it threatened to swallow reason itself. 11 years of sacrifice, counsel, and loyalty dismissed in a breath, as if I were a relic to be removed, an obstacle to be cast aside. I kept my face composed, but my mind reeled. Around the table, shareholders and board members exchanged glances that were part disbelief, part silent judgment. Some seemed to side with Derek's boldness, others appeared hesitant, uncertain which course to follow. The shift was unmistakable. The era I had helped build was closing, and I was being pushed out without ceremony or respect. My hands rested firmly against the smooth surface before me, fingers stiff but controlled. I had weathered storms before, economic crashes, hostile takeovers, but none as profoundly personal as this. This was not just about business. It was a deep fracture in the very foundation of my family, a betrayal that cut through years of trust. Derek began outlining his plans with the swagger of a man blind to the cost of haste. As he spoke of innovation and new directions, I felt the sting of exclusion, the sensation of being erased, like years of accumulated wisdom turned to dust. In that moment, I understood this was not a clash of minds or vision, but a deliberate repudiation. As the meeting closed, the polite nods and murmurs masked a consensus to embrace change without me. I rose, swallowing the lump in my throat, and stepped out. The sterile hallway was a stark contrast to the warmth I once found within these walls. Alone, I leaned against the window, gazing at the city lights below that seemed indifferent to the turmoil within me. The bitterness was sharp, but buried under a layer of calm. This humiliation was profound, yet beneath it simmered something else, the cold clarity of a man who has been wronged but not broken. I have always been a strategist, and though the game had changed rules, the board was still mine to analyze. The rejection was a wound, but it was also a call to action. The meeting had ended, but for me, this was only the beginning. The silence of my study wrapped around me, a familiar yet sobering embrace. The leather chair beneath me was worn from years of use, like the lines etched into my hands, each one a testament to the battles fought in boardrooms and late nights at the office. Surrounding me, rows of books offered knowledge accumulated over a lifetime. Dense tomes on corporate finance, binders filled with contracts, legal charts detailing clauses and contingencies. These were the tools I had wielded to build something lasting. Now, in the solitude of this room, they felt both like armor and a reminder of all I was being stripped away from. Memories rose like a tide, relentless and vivid. I saw myself bent over ledgers in the small hours, headlights casting long shadows across the room as I pored over payroll figures, ensuring every employee was paid, even when the numbers barely added up. Those moments were sacrifices, debts I bore quietly to keep the company afloat. I recalled the home I had mortgaged without hesitation to inject capital when times were toughest. Family vacations sacrificed, comforts foregone, all for a future I believed would justify every hardship. Derek's face floated through my mind, a boy once eager and bright-eyed, sitting beside me as I imparted lessons about risk, contracts, and strategy. I had invested not just money but hope in his education and early business ventures, confident that one day he would carry this legacy forward. I remembered redirecting family funds, paying for his tuition, standing behind him as he fumbled through his first deals. Each of these was a promise, an investment in shared dreams. The sting of his ingratitude cut deeper than any financial blow. Derek's recent dismissal was not only a professional snub but a personal repudiation. Years of loyalty, nights spent coaching him, sacrifices invisible to others were suddenly erased with callous ease. Though the pain threatened to overwhelm, I fought not to succumb. I refused to wallow in grief or bitterness. Instead, I summoned the parts of myself forged through decades of challenge: patience, strategic vision, steely resolve. Betrayal demanded more than anger. It required a measured, precise response. I turned my mind to strategy, sifting through the fragments of the business Derek now recklessly guided, searching for the cracks he had overlooked. A key memory resurfaced: the acquisition that propelled the company into prominence, achieved only because I had sacrificed personal treasures and redirected resources toward Derek's preparation. Late nights negotiating terms, tightening financial controls, securing contracts. I remembered all of it. Yet Derek now acted as if these achievements were his by default, as if my involvement was an irrelevant shadow. I ran my fingers along the edge of a contract lying open on my desk, heavy with legal jargon, clauses designed to protect us from exploitation and negligence. Derek's tendency to hastily sign deals without consulting counsel had placed us in peril. These overlooked clauses and missed deadlines were vulnerabilities ripe for strategic leverage. Beyond that, I considered Derek's flaws: his impatience, overconfidence, and reckless dismissal of experience. These human weaknesses were as dangerous as any financial liability. Recognizing these, I began to plot a response, not fueled by hatred, but by the clear-eyed calculation of a man who had been wronged but refused to be undone. Yet, amidst this growing determination, I did not diminish the ache beneath it all. This was more than a power struggle. It was a rupture in trust, a betrayal cutting deep into family ties. That wound would not heal overnight, but beneath it lay a steel spine. In the quiet of my study, the outlines of a plan took shape. I resolved to revisit every contract, audit Derek's decisions, and quietly amass support among those who still valued the company's integrity. The campaign ahead would be waged with intellect, patience, and precision, wielding the law and financial acumen like weapons honed for justice. I knew the journey would be arduous, fraught with strategic maneuvers, legal challenges, and the constant need for discretion. I had faced hostile takeovers and financial collapses before. This was different, painfully personal, but no less conquerable. As the evening shadows lengthened across the room, I made a silent vow. This betrayal would not be the end. It was a turning point, a moment from which I would reclaim control, not through brute force, but through steady resolve and unyielding wisdom. The man who built this legacy would not be cast aside so easily. The sacrifices of the past weighed heavily, but they also anchored my determination. I would not allow years of dedication, sweat, and trust to be squandered by arrogance and impatience. Justice would be restored. Arrogance would be corrected. Outside, the city sparkled indifferent below the window, unaware of the tempest within. But inside, a plan was already taking shape in the mind of a man both betrayed and unbroken. The game had changed. The board was still mine. This was just the beginning. Days passed beneath a sky indifferent to the turmoil roiling inside the company and inside me. The anonymous tip arrived like a thunderclap, a message concealed in shadows but heavy with consequence. Derek had been carelessly mismanaging critical contracts, letting deadlines slip through his grasp, and exposing the company to risks that could unravel everything. My initial shock gave way to icy clarity. This was no ordinary oversight. It was a cascade of failures born from arrogance and haste. I moved quietly, deliberately. With a select group of trusted lawyers and accountants, men and women whose knowledge I had earned over decades, I initiated a discreet investigation. These were old allies who knew the company's bones, the labyrinth of contracts and legalese that few dared to navigate. Over weeks, they dug into the filings, poring over transactions, cross-referencing dates and clauses, peeling back layers Derek either ignored or never understood. The findings were staggering. Missed obligations, unpaid debts lurking in the ledger like dormant landmines, dangerous breaches of contract that could invite lawsuits or weaken our negotiating power. Each error compounded the next, and worse, many stemmed from Derek's impulsive decisions, made without consultation, fueled by overconfidence and impatience. The reckless imprint of his leadership was clear and costly. Meanwhile, Derek's public posture hardened in the face of mounting pressure. At the most recent board meeting, he lashed out directly at me, calling me out of touch and accusing me of trying to sabotage his vision. His words were intended to discredit me, to rally allies behind his faltering leadership by painting me as an obstacle. The bitter irony was not lost on me. His disrespect was a confirmation of his failure. But his threats and insults did nothing but sharpen my resolve. I no longer hoped for reconciliation. That door was shut, bolted by his disdain and insolence. What remained was a duty to the company, to the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depended on sound leadership. And if that meant standing against my own son, so be it. I began mapping the financial wounds with precision. Every overlooked payment, every delayed vendor reimbursement, every botched contract renewal, these were not just administrative errors, but strategic vulnerabilities I could exploit. The orchestrated, gentle yet firm demands for overdue payments, holding loose threads that, when tugged, tightened the noose around Derek's faltering control. The impact rippled fast. Vendors grew suspicious and skittish, their trust eroding day by day. Conversations I overheard in the hallways, discreet calls with partners, doubt was taking root. The once confident network around Derek now questioned his leadership stability. Derek confronted me again, this time in a terse, tense exchange behind closed doors. His anger was a tempest, words thrown like punches, but I remained calm, refusing to rise to the bait. His confusion was palpable as operational crises multiplied, and I saw the doubt flicker in his eyes, a crack in his veneer. Simultaneously, I reached out quietly to board members and key shareholders who had grown uneasy with Derek's style. Through careful, strategic disclosures, enough to raise eyebrows but not set off alarms, I sowed seeds of skepticism. These discussions were guarded, conducted in hushed tones behind closed doors, building alliances for what was to come. Financial institutions, too, started pulling back. Approval of loans slowed. Credit lines were scrutinized with new rigor. Deals Derek had championed ground to a halt. The company's aura of invincibility dulled, shadowed by undercurrents of concern. This silent unraveling was subtle but potent, a tightening chokehold that Derek neither anticipated nor knew how to counter. Throughout this relentless pressure, I maintained a steady, composed front. The turmoil inside me, the disappointment, the betrayal, was locked away behind the facade of control. I played the long game, knowing that impulsive reactions would only hasten defeat. Each move was measured, designed to erode Derek's foundation without exposing all my cards. It was one of the lonelier battles I have faced. The son I had mentored, the young man I believed in, was now the architect of his own downfall. Watching that unravel was a complex tangle of sorrow, frustration, and a grim necessity. My sacrifices, years investing time, money, trust, felt both distant and poignant. Yet beneath it all, a quiet fire burned. This was not vendetta, it was responsibility. The stewardship of a company that meant more than profit. It was the livelihood of countless people, the dignity of a legacy I had labored to protect. This was justice demanding its course. In quiet moments, my mind raced ahead. I envisioned the coming legal battles, the recovery of financial stability, the restoration of leadership. Challenges loomed large: contractual disputes, shareholder votes, media scrutiny, but none shook the foundation of confidence I was rebuilding. Power, I reminded myself, was not seized in fits of rage or brute force. It was earned through patience, intellect, and unwavering resolve. I was ready to walk that path again, a path I had trod many times before, but this time sharpened by betrayal and driven by necessity. The fight played out in shadows: muted conversations, legal memos, financial audits, the covert chess game of corporate survival. Derek's empire showed cracks too deep to mend with bravado. Now I stood ready to reveal them at the right moment. The son I had hoped would carry this legacy forward was lost to hubris and impatience, but the man who built the empire was here still, calm, resolute, and far from finished. The game had changed, the stakes were higher than ever, but the board was still mine. In the sanctity of my study, late into the nights when the city hush settled like a blanket over the world, I began weaving the threads of a plan both intricate and deliberate. The years of corporate battles, the countless hours devoted to understanding the complex dance of contracts, finance, and strategic alliances, all of it now coalesced into a singular purpose: reclaiming what had been recklessly cast aside. Derek's blunderous leadership had left vulnerabilities ripe for exploitation, and I intended to use every ounce of experience and intellect to systematically unravel his fragile grip on the company. I pored over contracts with meticulous scrutiny: old files, new agreements, the sheets of legalese that govern every transaction and partnership. These documents were far more than paper. They were the DNA of the company's legal framework, a powerful arsenal when wielded knowledgeably. I sought nuances, clauses Derek's impatience had caused him to overlook, deadlines ignored, obligations unmet, fiduciary duties that had been breached, indemnity agreements twisted into liabilities. Each discovery was a potential game-changer in the war waged behind closed doors. To navigate this complex terrain, I activated my network: a cadre of trusted lawyers, seasoned accountants, and former executives who had traversed these waters by my side in past battles. Their expertise was invaluable. Under the guise of routine audits, they scrutinized financial statements and contractual obligations with an unyielding rigor. Slowly but surely, the evidence mounted: missed payments that jeopardized our relationships with suppliers, debts concealed in obscure ledger entries, and breaches of contract that exposed the company to legal actions that could cripple us. But caution was paramount. Each move had to be calculated and discreet so as not to alert Derek prematurely. The element of surprise, and the certainty born of complete preparations, was my most potent weapon. Revealing too much, too soon, risked handing him the opportunity to rally or strike back. I wielded the information like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and controlled. Simultaneously, I quietly assembled a low-profile investment entity. This was no mere financial holding. It was a strategic instrument designed to regain influence. Funded from my personal reserves, carefully segregated and protected, alongside capital preserved from a previous subsidiary, the entity operated under a veil of anonymity, poised to reacquire shares and quietly shift control back in my favor. The logistics of managing this operation were intricate, demanding a balance of secrecy and decisiveness. The worn conference table in my study became the theater of these campaigns, strewn with charts, balance sheets, timelines, and legal notes. Each scenario was analyzed, every contingency considered. It was a complex, multi-dimensional chess match played out in silence, far from the scrutiny of the corporate stage. Outside this quiet war room, Derek's public facade grew ever more inflated, his bluster masking the crumbling foundations beneath. I maintained a discreet watch, mindful not just of his actions, but of the shifting sentiments within the boardroom and among shareholders. Those who had once bowed unquestioningly to Derek's swagger began to question, recalling the steady stewardship that had once defined the company's ascent. Through subtle, carefully managed conversations with influential board members and major shareholders, I sought to rekindle their confidence in the company's older guard, myself and those who valued prudent management. The shift was gradual, a slow-burning skepticism about Derek's reckless governance replacing blind faith. I offered no grand speeches but shared quiet truths, supported by selective disclosures that hinted at the latent risks Derek had ignored. Parallel to restoring confidence within the leadership, my auditors and financial experts recalibrated perceptions in the external financial community. Through strategic, targeted disclosures, they emphasized the latent risks in company reports, gently enough to avoid panic, but sufficient to prompt caution. Loan officers, credit committees, and investment analysts began to see the fault lines where Derek's negligence had left them vulnerable. The company's once bright image dulled under this careful pressure, a silent erosion of trust that flickered beneath the surface. Through trusted contacts within the operational hierarchy, managers and long-standing employees loyal to the company's original values, I ensured that news of contractual lapses and overdue financial obligations reached key decision-makers in banking institutions and partner firms. This slow strategic tightening of control over the company's lifelines became a suffocating grip, quietly throttling Derek's ability to execute his ambitions. Derek, increasingly aware of the growing pressures but blind to their full extent, responded with erratic desperation. His decisions became impulsive, marked by frustration and volatile outbursts rarely seen in his earlier years. This public unraveling was as telling as any financial report, a visible fracture in the armor of his confidence. When he confronted me, fury and disbelief flared in his eyes. Words cut sharp with blame and accusation. Yet beneath his storm, I discerned the flicker of uncertainty, a shadow of doubt piercing through his bravado. I held my ground with measured calm, refusing to be drawn into the chaos of his emotions. This encounter was a necessary test, a demonstration of steady resolve that further weakened his resolve and confidence. Behind the closed doors of the boardroom, the atmosphere transformed. Conversations grew hushed and intense. Alliances shifted in subtle but deliberate ways. Shareholders, confronted with reality rather than rhetoric, began re-evaluating their support. The fragile veneer of unwavering loyalty cracked under the weight of evidence and doubt. Recognizing the possibility of countermoves from Derek, be it through legal challenges or emergency alliances, I ensured my legal counsel was prepared for all contingencies. The investment entity I controlled acquired shares quietly but steadily from the open market, increasing my sway over company decisions without drawing undue attention. Every maneuver was designed with adaptability in mind, capable of absorption and redirection in response to Derek's unpredictable tactics. The enormity of what I was orchestrating did not escape me. This was no routine corporate dispute. It was a battle for the heart and soul of a legacy, entangled with the painful fractures of family and loyalty. The stakes were personal and profound, adding weight to every decision, every calculated risk. Nights were long, often ending in solitude as exhaustion settled deep within me. Yet the inner fire, that relentless drive born from years of dedication, burned brighter than ever. The company was more than a business. It was a testament to sacrifice and vision, a living history of endurance and ambition. Protecting it was not just a duty, but a calling. The war I fought was silent, invisible to the public eye, A game of shadows played with whispers, legal memos, financial stratagems, and quiet conversations in dimly lit rooms. Each piece on the board moved with care, guided by a mind trained to anticipate and adapt. Derek's reign, once seemingly secure, was revealing itself as fragile and brittle. The cracks widened with every passing day, the erosion of trust leaving his empire increasingly vulnerable. The company's health was my responsibility to restore, and I embraced that role with steadfast determination. I had come to understand that power is neither absolute nor static. It is a continuous creation, earned by wise decisions, patience, and unwavering resolve. This battlefield was familiar, yet every battle carries its own scars and lessons. My sacrifices, the quiet nights, the financial risks, the emotional toll, were the price of leadership. Yet they were also the foundation for renewal. My name remained woven into the company's fabric. But soon it would resonate anew, not only as a legacy, but as a commanding presence shaping the future. The boardroom would no longer be a place of exclusion. It was to become the arena for a quiet comeback, one forged through skill and patience rather than bluster. The game had undeniably changed. The stakes were higher, the players more unpredictable. Yet amidst this evolving landscape, the player at the center remained the same, steady, resolute, and far from finished. The board was still mine, and the story far from over. The first unmistakable tremors of my unfolding strategy began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Through a series of carefully timed moves, I initiated the collection of debts Derek had foolishly let slide. It was a matter of simple arithmetic disguised as a complex chess maneuver. Vendors, suppliers, and contractors who had been waiting beyond the credit terms I had painstakingly negotiated were now being reminded, discreetly but firmly, that their patience could not last forever. The effects rippled swiftly through the company's operational veins. Cash flow tightened, leaving Derek scrambling to patch holes in a dam that was leaking faster than he could plug. The vendors, once trusting partners, now whispered doubts to one another, their fingers brushing over contracts with fresh wariness. The foundation upon which Derek had built his assumed control was shifting beneath him. When he finally confronted me, the tension between us simmered just beneath the surface, ready to erupt. His voice was low but edged with fury as he demanded answers about the growing turmoil. He accused me of undermining him, of meddling in affairs he insisted were no longer mine. I met his rage not with retaliation, but with a calm steadiness, a refusal to give him the reaction he craved. His confusion and frustration only deepened as he realized parts of his empire were unraveling in ways he had neither anticipated nor controlled. At the same time, I worked tirelessly behind the scenes to strengthen alliances within the boardroom. I reached out to directors whose faith in Derek's leadership was waning, sharing carefully curated evidence of the company's precarious state, enough to awaken suspicion, but not yet to provoke open revolt. These conversations were strategic whispers, the slightest prick of doubt planted to blossom over time. The atmosphere at board meetings began to shift. The once unanimous support gradually fractured into factions. Derek's confidence started to show cracks as questions during discussions became sharper, more pointed. His bravado gave way to defensive posturing, a man beginning to realize that authority based solely on inheritance was fragile territory. Financial institutions, too, grew wary. Credit lines and loan approvals began stalling under increased scrutiny. Negotiations that had once been routine now encountered new hurdles, regulatory reviews, risk assessments, and second looks at Derek's ambitious projects. The sleek image of unassailable growth dulled under careful analysis. Throughout, I remained composed, the eye of a growing storm. I controlled the pace of the pressure, tightening gradually, not allowing for rash moves or desperation that could give Derek openings for counterattack. I listened carefully to reports, adjusting plans, and engaged discreetly with legal advisors ready to respond to any challenge. The battlefield was complex, shifting in real time, demanding unwavering attention. Watching Derek's gradual unraveling was a mixed experience, a bittersweet blend of sorrow and vindication. Once I had nurtured him, a boy eager to learn, brimming with potential. Now his errors and disregard placed not only his own position but the company's future at risk. My sacrifices, financial, emotional, personal, felt like distant memories confronting this harsh present. Yet, at the core of my resolve lay a responsibility far greater than familial pain or personal pride. This venture was a lifeline for hundreds of employees, families, and communities. Safeguarding their future was an imperative I embraced beyond personal feelings. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting where Derek's proposals were met with heavy skepticism, I retreated to my study reflecting on the path ahead. Legal battles loomed, lawsuits over contractual breaches, shareholder votes challenging governance, and a media eager to capitalize on any sign of corporate drama. But none of these obstacles unsettled me. Each was a challenge I had weathered before, transformed into a test of endurance and strategy. Power is never seized overnight. It is crafted meticulously over time through patience, intellect, and measured action. I was prepared to navigate this course once more, steeled by previous hardships and propelled by the urgency of betrayal. The war played out in subtle manners, quiet strategic moves, confidential legal memos, revisiting contracts with hawk-like precision, and sensing every nuance within boardroom conversations. Derek's empire, once confident and expansive, revealed frailty beneath his bluster. The show of strength was paper-thin, and I was ready to reveal the truth at the optimal moment. Meanwhile, Derek's public demeanor alternated between defiant bravado and moments of visible strain. The weight of operational crises and diminishing support gnawed at him, though he hid it well in public appearances. He attempted rallies of support, grand announcements, and flashy initiatives to distract from mounting internal doubts, but the cracks were now clear to those paying attention. Throughout this process, I maintained an ironclad focus on my goals. I balanced my desire for justice with the need for precision and patience. Emotional reactions, while inevitable beneath the surface, were kept carefully in check. The stakes were too high for anything less than calculated resolve. Day after day, I engaged with trusted inner circles, evaluating financial reports, legal updates, and shareholder sentiments. Quiet negotiations to secure votes of confidence, discreet discussions to realign perspectives, all were part of a patient campaign to reshape the company's leadership balance. When Derek attempted to press forward with high-stakes deals, I relied on my network to introduce friction. Financial backers, previously swayed by his promises, began requesting additional assurances and stricter terms. Vendors, already cautious, sought more guarantees before extending credit. This tightening web increased pressure on Derek's fragile control. One afternoon, I received a call from a senior board member, a cautious but hopeful voice in a sea of uncertainty, indicating growing appetite for change among shareholders. It was a sign that momentum was shifting, that my quiet campaign was resonating. These small victories fueled my determination. Yet, in the quiet moments, I grappled with the personal toll. The fatherly hopes dashed, the burdens borne in silence, all contrasted sharply with the job I had set before myself. It was a lonely road, littered with sacrifices that only I could truly understand. But leadership demands sacrifice. The mantle I bore was heavy, but I carried it with steadfast resolve. With each move, the strategy deepened. Legal teams prepared documents, financial operations tightened controls, and the investment entity slowly grew influence. We built a comprehensive playbook, steps orchestrated to shift ownership stakes and boardroom power without alerting Derek until the final act. The corporate chessboard was in motion, pieces positioning carefully for the decisive strikes to come. I was no longer merely fighting for control. I was restoring honor, safeguarding a legacy built over decades. The days ahead promised confrontation, but I faced it with the calm of a seasoned strategist ready to reclaim what was owed, not through force but through intelligence, patience, and unwavering determination. I was resolved. I was ready. The game was far from over. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension when the annual shareholders' meeting finally convened, a gathering overshadowed by months of whispered doubt, fractured alliances, and the mounting weight of truth. The room, a grand chamber filled with windows overlooking the city skyline, held an expectant crowd, many of whom had come expecting revelations. I sat quietly among them, feeling the weight of years of sacrifice, of planning, and of enduring silent storms converge in this moment. When it was my turn, I rose with calm purpose, steady hands gripping the edges of the podium. The voice that emerged was measured, firm, forged from a life spent navigating the complex currents of corporate strategy and familial burden. This was more than a presentation. It was a reckoning. I began by outlining the scope of leadership Derek had exercised, his rapid ascension fueled by raw inheritance rather than earned wisdom, and the consequences that had quietly but relentlessly accumulated beneath the surface. I presented a detailed dossier, layered with financial audits, legal analyses, and contractual examinations that left no room for doubt or denial. Every needlepoint of mismanagement, every overlooked deadline, and every accumulating debt was laid bare in precise, irrefutable terms. The room shifted as the audience absorbed the relentless tide of facts. Eyes narrowed, murmurs spread like wildfire, and the previously confident murmur of Derek's supporters faltered. Numbers and documents, so cold and dispassionate, had grown into a force more powerful than rhetoric or bravado. Derek, perched at the opposite end of the room, met my gaze with a mask of defiance, but I saw the cracks behind the facade, the tension in his jaw, the fleeting hesitations, the subtle avoidance. His rebuttals, when they came, were defensive and imprecise, unable to stem the steady erosion of his authority. I spoke then not for vengeance, but as a guardian of the company's future, reminding the assembly of the long and arduous path that had brought us here. I detailed the nights spent poring over contracts to ensure every safeguard, the personal risks taken to sustain the company through market storms, the careful stewardship that crafted a legacy of resilience. This was a legacy not of entitlement, but of responsibility. As I concluded, a profound silence settled, one heavier than any spoken word. The shareholders' collective resolve ripened into palpable energy as they weighed the furnaces of their concerns. The decision was not merely about leadership, but about preserving the integrity and viability of the company itself. The vote was swift and decisive. Derek's removal from power was not a surprise, but a hard-earned catharsis. The betrayal that had cut so sharply was met with justice, tempered by patience and unwavering commitment. Watching Derek's departure from the firm's leadership, a man once poised for inheritance, now eclipsed by consequences, evoked a complex cascade of emotions within me. Sorrow for broken bonds, disappointment tempered by years of unheeded warnings, but above all, a deep sense of vindication. What had once been a grave humiliation had been transformed into a solemn triumph. The company now stood on the threshold of recovery. Trustees appointed in the wake of Derek's exit represented a steady, disciplined hand, committed to restoring sound governance and rebuilding shattered trust. The future, once a fragile hope, now contained seeds of renewal. That evening, alone in the quiet of my study, I reflected on the journey. The arc from betrayal to redemption was neither swift nor simple, but a testament to the enduring strength born of patience and wisdom. Justice had been achieved, not through rash fury, but deliberate, measured effort. The scars left by family fracture remained, but so did the resilience forged in their aftermath. The legacy I sought to protect was more than financial wealth. It was a symbol of perseverance, honor, and unwavering resolve. As the city outside dimmed with the setting sun, I understood that true leadership is not only about power, but the courage to confront loss, to endure, and to rebuild. The battles won opened roads toward healing, to mend fractured relationships, to restore confidence, and to guide the company gently but firmly into an uncertain future. Though the victory was profound, it was but a chapter in an ongoing story. The scars of betrayal lingered, but the promise of renewal beckoned. With the dossier closed and the study bathed in silence, I embraced a quiet satisfaction, not of triumph, but of duty fulfilled. The legacy reclaimed was no longer a relic. It was a living flame, kindled anew through wisdom and unwavering resolve. The story of this company and my place within it was far from over. Future chapters awaited, paths filled with trials and triumphs yet unwritten. But for now, the firm foundation was restored, the rightful course set, and the steward stood ready to guide it forward with a steady hand and an unbroken heart. The quiet that enveloped me that evening was profound and different from all I had known before. The battle to reclaim the company, to restore its honor and secure its future had been long and exacting. Now, as night settled over the city and the windows of my study framed the shimmering lights below, I felt the weight of what had been accomplished, and the solemn responsibility still ahead. The company now stood on fragile yet firm ground. Trustees appointed to guide it forward brought steadiness and discipline, qualities sorely needed to heal the fractures left by reckless decisions. Their oversight was not merely a stopgap, but a promise that careful stewardship would return, slowly rebuilding shattered trust and steering the company through uncertain waters. Reflecting on the journey from bitter betrayal to hard-earned redemption, I understood it was neither swift nor simple. It was a testament to patience over passion, wisdom over impulse, and resilience over despair. Justice was not a sudden sword, but a steady hand, deliberate, measured, and unwavering. The scars inflicted on family relationships lay quietly beneath the surface, reminders of wounds that time alone might not resolve. Yet within those wounds was also a testament to resilience, the kind constructed only through experience and sacrifice. The legacy I sought to protect transcended financial assets or titles. It was a symbol of honor, perseverance, and steadfast resolve, forged in the fires of adversity. As twilight deepened, I saw clearly that true leadership demanded more than power. It required the courage to face loss head-on, to endure hardship without yielding, and to commit oneself fully to rebuilding what had been damaged. Leadership was less about possession and more about stewardship, a continuous act of care and responsibility. The victories achieved opened new avenues, paths to reconciliation, restoration, and healing. Rebuilding broken relationships with shareholders, clients, and employees would take time, patience, and sincere effort. Confidence once shaken must be regained not by promises alone, but through consistent, transparent action. The future was uncertain and challenging, but no less full of potential because of that. Though the victory felt profound, it was but one chapter in an ongoing story. Betrayal's echoes lingered, reminding me that vigilance was ongoing and resilience must be maintained. Yet, beyond those echoes, the promise of renewal beckoned, bright and clear against the shadows. With the final dossiers closed and the study bathed in soft silence, I felt a quiet satisfaction settling over me. It was not the triumph shouted from rooftops, but the deep contentment that comes from duty fulfilled, responsibility embraced, and legacy preserved. This was no longer a relic of the past, but a living flame, one rekindled through wisdom, patience, and unwavering resolve. My place in the company's story remained active and vital. New chapters lay ahead, unwritten journeys filled with trials, triumphs, challenges, and growth. These were paths I was both humbled by and ready to face, armed with the lessons etched into my soul through years of sacrifice. For now, the foundation was restored, solid, steady, and true.
The rightful course had been set, not by force or fury, but through intelligence and endurance. The steward stood ready, his heart unbroken and his purpose clear, prepared to guide the company forward through whatever storms or sunshine the future might hold. I glanced once more out the window, where the city's lights twinkled like distant hopes. In that quiet glow, I found resolve renewed. Power is not seized by force. It is earned through wisdom and steadfast commitment. That truth, more than any profit or title, would be the legacy I leave behind.